The funeral director's hand froze on the guest book. His face went from professional sympathy to absolute horror in under 3 seconds. He looked at me, then at the casket, then back at me, his mouth opening and closing like a dying fish. "Ma'am," he whispered, his voice cracking, you can't be here." I smiled, adjusted the collar of my black dress, and looked him straight in the eye. "Why not? I wouldn't miss my own funeral for the world." His hand went to his phone. I could see him mentally calculating whether to call the police, a priest, or a psychiatrist, but before he could decide, I heard her voice. My mother's voice, dripping with theatrical grief, echoing from the chapel where 200 people had gathered to mourn my tragic, untimely death. "My beautiful daughter," she sobbed into a microphone, "taken from us so young, so full of life, so wealthy." That last word she said quieter, but I heard it. Oh, I heard it. She didn't know I was standing in the lobby. She didn't know I'd flown back from Singapore 12 hours ago, and she definitely didn't know about the lawyer, the private investigator, and the police detective currently sitting in the third row, recording every word of her performance. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand exactly how a mother decides to kill her own daughter on paper, throw her a lavish funeral, and cash in on a $4.2 million trust fund. My name is Elena Castellanos. I'm 29 years old, and 3 weeks ago I found out I was dead. I work as a senior architect for an international firm based in Singapore. It's the kind of job that keeps you moving. London for a month, Dubai for 3 weeks, back to Singapore for planning sessions. I'd been on this trajectory for 5 years, building a career my family back in Connecticut barely understood and definitely didn't respect. My mother, Patricia Castellanos, has always been a woman who values exactly 2 things: appearances and money, preferably both at the same time. She lives in the same estate in Greenwich where I grew up, the kind of place where the hedges are trimmed weekly and the neighbors measure their worth in yacht footage. My father died when I was 16. A heart attack at 52, sudden and devastating. He left behind a complicated estate, but the part that mattered most was the trust fund he'd set up for me. $4 million, accessible when I turned 30, with provisions for early access only in cases of extreme hardship or medical emergency. My mother was named trustee. At the time, it seemed logical. I was a teenager. She was his widow. The lawyers drew up the paperwork with all the standard protections, or so we thought. For years, everything was fine. I went to college, started my career, moved abroad. My mother and I weren't close, we'd never been close, but we maintained a polite distance. Birthday calls, Christmas visits every few years, the occasional email about family business. Then, 3 months ago, something changed. My mother started calling more frequently. The conversations were always the same. She needed money. The estate taxes were crushing her. The house needed emergency repairs. Her investments had unexpected losses. Each time, I sent what I could afford, $5,000 here, $10,000 there. I felt guilty being overseas while she struggled alone. I didn't know she'd been systematically draining her own accounts on luxury vacations, a new Mercedes, and a complete renovation of a house that didn't need renovating. I didn't know she'd leveraged the estate to the breaking point with loans and credit lines, and I definitely didn't know that she'd discovered a loophole in my father's trust. If I died before turning 30, the entire trust would revert to the estate. As the sole heir to my father's estate and the executor, she would control everything. $4.2 million, 1 inconvenient daughter, and a woman desperate enough to do the unthinkable. 3 weeks ago, I was in a planning meeting in Singapore when my phone started exploding. Not with calls. My mother had always preferred dramatic emails, but with texts from people I hadn't heard from in years. "Oh my God, Elena, I just heard. I'm so sorry." "Your poor mother. Is there anything we can do?" "The obituary is beautiful. You would have loved it." I stared at my phone, my heart hammering. Whose obituary? I opened my laptop with shaking hands and searched my name. Elena Marie Castellanos, 29, dies in tragic overseas accident. The article was from the Greenwich Daily Voice, published 2 days earlier. It described a devastating car accident in Singapore that had claimed my life. It quoted my mother extensively, her grief, her shock, her profound loss. It mentioned the funeral scheduled for Saturday at St. Catherine's Church. It mentioned that I'd been traveling alone and that authorities were still investigating. There were photos, my high school graduation picture, a shot from my cousin's wedding 5 years ago, my mother dramatically posed in black, looking appropriately devastated. I read it 3 times before my hands stopped shaking enough to call my office manager. "Emma," I said, my voice eerily calm, "I need you to do something unusual. I need you to confirm that I am, in fact, alive and sitting in your conference room." Emma laughed nervously. "Elena, are you okay? Just do it, please, officially. Write it down, timestamp it, and send it to my personal email." She did. 2 minutes later, I had documentation that I was alive, well, and very confused in Singapore on the same day my mother told the world I died there. I called my mother 17 times. Every call went to voicemail. I sent emails, I sent texts, nothing. Then I called my father's estate lawyer, Martin Vance. He'd handled the trust, the will, everything. He was the one person who would know what was happening. "Mr. Vance, it's Elena Castellanos." There was a long, painful pause. "Elena?" His voice was strange, tight. "Elena, where are you calling from?" "Singapore." "Mr. Vance, what the hell is going on? Why is there an obituary saying I'm dead?" Another pause. Then, quietly, "Elena, your mother filed a death certificate with the state 3 days ago. She submitted documentation from Singapore authorities claiming you died in a car accident. She's already initiated probate proceedings to access the trust." My blood went cold. "She what?" "Elena, this is fraud. Identity fraud. Trust fraud. If you're alive, I am alive," I nearly shouted. "I'm in a conference room in Singapore with 12 witnesses. I have passport stamps. I have security footage. I am alive." "Then you need to come home," Vance said, his lawyer voice kicking in. "Right now, before she disperses those funds. Elena, if she accesses that trust and spends it, recovering it becomes exponentially more complicated." "There's a funeral," I said slowly. "Saturday. St. Catherine's." "Yes, she's throwing me a funeral." "Yes." I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, and something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. Not grief. I'd grieve later for the mother I'd wanted her to be. This was something else. This was fury wrapped in ice. "Mr. Vance," I said quietly, "I think I'd like to attend." I booked a flight that left in 4 hours. While I packed, I started making calls. First to my best friend Rachel, an attorney in New York specializing in estate law. I sent her everything: the obituary, the trust documents, screenshots of my location data, my passport. "Jesus Christ, Elena," she breathed. "Your mother is committing multiple felonies. This is fraud, identity theft, and trust misappropriation at minimum. Can she actually access the money? If she's convincing enough and moves fast? Yes. The trust has provisions for death benefits. With a death certificate and the probate court's approval, she could have access within weeks. How do I stop her? You prove you're alive before she gets the funds. And Elena? You're going to need more than just showing up." She filed official documents. She convinced a newspaper. She has a funeral planned. This is elaborate. You need to be strategic. Second call. Private investigator Marcus Chen, recommended by Rachel. I explained everything while boarding my flight. I need to know what she's done, who she's told, and most importantly, what evidence exists of this accident. "I'm on it," Marcus said. "Give me 24 hours. The flight from Singapore to New York was 14 hours. I didn't sleep. I sat in my business class seat, laptop open, and started digging. My mother's social media was a goldmine, posted 2 days after my alleged death. A photo of her in black, with a caption about unbearable loss and the light of my life extinguished. 300 comments of sympathy. Posted the next day, a GoFundMe. Help Patricia honor her daughter's memory. The goal was $50,000 for funeral expenses and grief counseling. She'd raised $23,000 in 48 hours. I screenshotted everything. Marcus called as I landed in New York. "Elena, your mother is either the dumbest criminal I've ever seen or the most arrogant. Maybe both. What did you find?" "The death certificate she filed lists you as dying in a car accident on Orchard Road in Singapore. I contacted the Singapore police force. There was no accident on that date. No accident involving anyone with your name in the past 6 months. No morgue admission, no hospital record, nothing." "So she fabricated everything?" "Gets better. I tracked down the official documentation she submitted to probate court. It's a death certificate. But it's not from Singapore's Immigration and Checkpoints Authority. The format is wrong. The registration number doesn't exist in their system, and the stamp is a bad Photoshop job. I had a forensics expert look at it. She literally made this in Microsoft Word. I closed my eyes. She's not even good at this. She didn't need to be good. She needed to be fast. Your trust was 3 weeks away from your 30th birthday when the entire amount becomes available to you without restriction. If she could get a death certificate filed, start probate, and access the funds before anyone questioned it, she'd be gone. Gone where? I checked her recent activity. She's booked a one-way ticket to Monaco. Leaves Monday, 2 days after your funeral. My mother wasn't planning to grieve. She was planning to run. I landed in New York on Thursday evening. The funeral was Saturday at 2 p.m. I had 42 hours. Rachel met me at her office in Manhattan with a full legal team. "Here's what we're going to do," she said, spreading documents across the conference table. "We need irrefutable proof that you're alive, that you were never in an accident, and that your mother committed fraud. Then we need to decide how to reveal it." "The funeral," I said immediately. Rachel's eyebrow went up. "You want to show up to your own funeral?" "I want her to finish her performance. I want her to accept every condolence, every donation, every sympathetic look. I want her to believe she got away with it. And then I want to walk in and watch her world collapse." One of the associate lawyers, a young woman named Amy, grinned. "I love this plan." We spent the next 2 days building an airtight case. Evidence Package 1, proof of life, passport with entry-exit stamps, Singapore police report confirming no accident, employer affidavits with timestamps, security camera footage from my Singapore office, dated and timestamped, credit card transactions showing my purchases in Singapore during the time I was dead, my location data from my phone provider. Evidence Package 2, proof of fraud, the fake death certificate with forensic analysis, comparison to legitimate Singapore death certificates, email records showing my mother had searched how to obtain death certificate and Singapore death certificate format, the GoFundMe she'd started, bank records showing her financial desperation. Evidence Package 3, intent, her Monaco flight booking, records of her attempts to access the trust, communications with the probate court, the funeral itself. She'd spent $35,000 on a service for someone she knew was alive. We also coordinated with law enforcement. Detective Sarah Morrison from the Connecticut State Police Financial Crimes Unit was very interested in our case. Identity fraud, wire fraud if she used any electronic communications, and trust fraud, Detective Morrison listed. If she's accessed any of the GoFundMe money, that's also fraud. Mrs. Castellanos has been busy. "Will you be at the funeral?" I asked. She smiled. "Wouldn't miss it. I'll bring friends." On Friday night, Rachel and I did a final review. "You're sure about this?" she asked. "We could stop her right now. File an emergency injunction, freeze everything, arrest her tonight." I thought about all the times I'd sent her money, all the guilt trips about being overseas, about not being there, about being selfish with my career, all the small cruelties that I'd excused as her grief over my father, all the lies. "I want her to finish," I said quietly. "I want everyone who knows her to see exactly who she is." Saturday morning, I woke up in Rachel's guest room and put on a black dress. The irony wasn't lost on me. St. Catherine's Church was in the heart of Greenwich, a beautiful stone building where I'd been baptized, where my father's funeral had been held. My mother had chosen it deliberately for maximum sympathy. I arrived at 1:30 p.m., 30 minutes before the service. The funeral director, a man named Mr. Peterson, was in the lobby arranging programs. That's when I walked in. His reaction was everything I described at the beginning: shock, horror, confusion. He literally stumbled backward. "Ma'am, you can't be here." "Why not?" I wouldn't miss my own funeral for the world. He reached for his phone, but I raised a hand. "Mr. Peterson, my name is Elena Castellanos. I believe you have some programs there with my face on them." He looked down at the programs, then at me, then at the programs. "This is impossible," he whispered. "No, it's fraud, and in about 30 minutes it's going to be very public fraud. I need you to do me a favor." I explained what I needed. His eyes went wider and wider. "If you do this," he said slowly, "your mother will be arrested." "I know." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. My father died last year. If someone had done this to his memory, to his funeral, I'd want them to pay too. I'll help you. At 1:45, guests started arriving. I watched from a small office with a window overlooking the lobby. I saw cousins I hadn't seen in years, my mother's friends, dripping in pearls and false sympathy, former neighbors, my father's old business associates, and my mother. She arrived at 1:50 in a limousine, dressed in designer black, veiled, leaning on my aunt's arm like she could barely walk from grief. I watched her pause in the lobby, accepting condolences, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. She was good. I'll give her that. She was very, very good. At 2 p.m. exactly, the service began. Mr. Peterson directed everyone to the chapel. I waited in the office, watching on the closed-circuit monitor as 200 people filed in and sat down. The front row was reserved for family. My mother sat in the center, my aunt beside her, my uncle on the other side. In the third row, exactly as planned, sat Detective Morrison in plain clothes, accompanied by 2 other officers I didn't recognize. And in the fourth row, recording everything on her phone, sat Rachel. The service started with a hymn. Then the priest, Father Michael, who'd known my family for 20 years, stepped to the pulpit. We gather today to mourn the loss of Elena Marie Castellanos, taken from us far too soon. I watched my mother's face. She was crying. Real tears, or close enough to real that it didn't matter. Father Michael spoke about my childhood, my accomplishments, my father's pride in me. He'd clearly been well briefed by my mother. The details were accurate enough to be believable, emotional enough to wring tears from the congregation. Then came the eulogies. My aunt went first. She spoke about family Christmases, about my father, about how much my mother had lost. Then my mother stood. The crowd quieted immediately. This was the moment they'd come for, the grieving mother's farewell to her only child. She walked slowly to the microphone, visibly trembling. She gripped the pulpit like she might collapse without it. "My daughter," she began, her voice breaking, "was the light of my life." I watched her performance with cold fascination. Elena was brilliant, driven, so full of potential. When she moved to Singapore, I was heartbroken to lose her, but so proud, so proud. A lie. She'd called my career running away from family responsibility. These past few weeks, planning this service, going through her things, I've been asking myself how I'll survive this. How does a mother bury her only child? She paused, letting the sob build in her throat. But then I remember what Elena would want. She'd want me to be strong. She'd want me to honor her memory by living fully, by taking the opportunities she never had. By taking the money, she meant. Elena left behind so much love, so much potential. And while she's gone from us physically, her spirit, that's when I walked in. I entered from the side door, the one that leads directly to the front of the chapel. I'd timed it perfectly. My mother was mid-sentence, facing the congregation, her back partially to the entrance. The first person who saw me was my cousin Maria in the second row. Her mouth fell open. She made a small choking sound. Then the woman next to her. Then the row behind. A wave of gasps rippled through the chapel like a stone thrown into still water. My mother, confused by the reaction, turned around. Our eyes met. Her face went through an extraordinary journey in about 3 seconds. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, horror, and finally panic. The handkerchief slipped from her fingers. I walked slowly down the center aisle. Every eye in the room tracked my movement. The silence was so complete, I could hear my heels clicking on the marble floor. I reached the front, stepped up to the pulpit, and gently moved my mother aside. She stumbled backward, catching herself on the front pew. I adjusted the microphone and looked out at 200 stunned faces. "Hi, everyone," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I'm Elena Castellanos. Sorry I'm late to my own funeral. Traffic from the airport was terrible." Dead silence. Then from the back, someone started laughing. Nervous, shocked laughter that spread like wildfire. My mother found her voice. "Elena, what?" I turned to look at her. "How am I alive, Mom? Well, that's an interesting question because I've never been dead, not even a little bit." I pulled out my phone and connected it to the church's AV system. The large screen behind the altar, meant for displaying photos of me, now showed my passport. Here's my passport. You can see I left Singapore yesterday. Here's security footage from my office showing me in meetings all last week. Here, I pulled up my credit card app. Our charges from Singapore dated after I allegedly died. Starbucks, mostly. I have a problem. A few shocked laughs from the crowd. And here, I brought up the fake death certificate, is the document my mother filed with the state of Connecticut claiming I died in a car accident in Singapore. I zoomed in on the obvious Photoshop errors, the wrong font, the misaligned stamp, the registration number that didn't exist. Mom's not great with technology, but she is great at fraud. My mother lunged forward. You don't understand. Don't I? I cut her off. Let me tell you what I understand. I understand that 3 weeks before my 30th birthday, when I would have gotten full access to my $4.2 million trust fund, you decided to kill me on paper. I understand that you fabricated a death certificate, filed it with probate court, and started the process to claim my inheritance. The gasps were louder now, shocked murmurs rippling through the crowd. I understand that you started a GoFundMe asking for $50,000 in funeral expenses when this funeral only cost $35,000. I understand that you booked a one-way ticket to Monaco leaving Monday, 2 days after you buried your grief. I pulled up her flight confirmation on the screen. My mother's face had gone from pale to gray. Elena, please. And I understand, I continued, my voice hardening, that you spent the last 3 weeks accepting sympathy, donations, and condolences for a daughter you knew was alive. You looked these people in the eye and lied. You looked Father Michael in the eye and lied. You stood at this pulpit and performed grief for a death you invented. I turned to face the congregation fully. My father set up that trust to take care of me. He never imagined that the woman he trusted to protect it would try to steal it by murdering me on paper. He never imagined his widow would throw his daughter a funeral as part of a con. Father Michael, who'd been frozen at the side of the altar, found his voice. Patricia, is this true? My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. I nodded to Detective Morrison, who stood up in the third row and held up her badge. Patricia Castellanos, I'm Detective Morrison with the Connecticut State Police. We need to have a conversation about fraud, identity theft, and wire fraud. 2 uniformed officers appeared at the side doors. My mother looked around wildly, like a trapped animal. Her gaze landed on the back exit. She actually took 2 steps toward it before my uncle, her own brother, stepped into the aisle and shook his head. Don't, Patricia, don't make this worse. She stopped. Her shoulders slumped. The performance was over. Detective Morrison approached the front. Mrs. Castellanos, we have evidence that you knowingly filed false documents with the state, that you fraudulently solicited donations, and that you attempted to illegally access trust funds. You're going to need to come with us. My mother turned to me, and for just a second I saw something real in her eyes. Not remorse, desperation. Elena, please, I'm your mother. You can't do this to me. I looked at her. This woman who'd given birth to me, raised me, and then decided I was worth more dead than alive. You did this to yourself, I said quietly, the moment you decided to kill your daughter for money. The officers moved forward with handcuffs. The congregation watched in stunned silence as my mother was read her rights and led down the center aisle in handcuffs, past the people who'd come to mourn me, past the programs with my smiling face, past the flowers she'd ordered with money she'd stolen from sympathetic donors. As she reached the door, she turned back one last time. I needed that money, she said, and her voice was different now. Not the grief-stricken mother, but something harder, uglier. You were gone anyway, always gone. Singapore, London, Dubai. You left me alone in that house. I needed it more than you did. You're right, I said. I was gone, because I was building a life, and you were so jealous of that life that you'd rather I was dead than successful. She had no answer for that. The officers led her out. After my mother was taken away, the chapel remained frozen in shocked silence, 200 people staring at me, at each other, at the empty casket that was supposed to hold my body. Father Michael approached slowly, his face pale. Elena, I am so sorry. She showed me documentation. She was so convincing, I never thought. Father, you're not the one who should apologize, I said gently. You were lied to. You all were. I turned to face the congregation. Many of them were crying, not from grief now, but from shock, anger, betrayal. My aunt, my mother's sister, stood up. Her voice shook. Elena, we had no idea. She told us everything seemed legitimate. She showed us the death certificate. We believed her. I know, I said. That's what good con artists do. They make you believe. Rachel appeared at my side, ever the lawyer. For those of you who contributed to the GoFundMe, we'll be working with the platform to refund every donation. The entire amount will be returned within the week. A man in the back, one of my father's old business partners, stood up. Elena, your father would be horrified by this. If there's anything we can do. Actually, I interrupted. There is. My father believed in community. He believed in taking care of people. So I'm going to honor his memory properly. I pulled out a document Rachel and I had prepared the night before. My trust fund is now accessible early due to the circumstances. The full $4.2 million. I'm establishing the Richard Castellanos Memorial Foundation in my father's name. It will provide support for families dealing with financial fraud, identity theft, and elder financial abuse, because apparently these problems are more common than I thought. The reaction was immediate. Applause, tears, people standing. The energy in the room shifted from horror to something lighter, something hopeful. The foundation will also support young architects and designers from underprivileged backgrounds. My father loved buildings. He would have wanted his legacy to help people build things, not destroy them. Father Michael smiled, tears in his eyes. That's beautiful, Elena. Your father would be so proud. And, I added, I'm donating this church $50,000 to cover the cost of this funeral and to support your community programs. Consider it my way of apologizing for the most awkward service you've ever had to host. That got genuine laughter. The tension broke like a dam bursting. People started coming up to me, old family friends, relatives I hadn't seen in years, neighbors who'd known me as a child. Every single one apologized for believing I was dead, for not questioning, for not checking. She was your mother, I told them, over and over. You trusted her. That's what normal people do. My uncle pulled me aside. His eyes were red. Elena, I'm so sorry. Patricia is my sister, but what she did, there's no excuse. If you need anything at all. I need you to take care of yourself, I said. This is going to be hard on the family. I don't want collateral damage. He hugged me tightly. You're a better person than I would be. Marcus, my private investigator, appeared at the back of the church. He caught my eye and nodded toward the exit. I excused myself and followed him to the lobby. The police executed a search warrant on your mother's house an hour ago, he said quietly. You want to know what they found? Tell me. 3 suitcases packed and ready to go, a fake passport under a different name, and a folder containing research on non-extradition countries. She wasn't just planning to leave, Elena. She was planning to disappear forever. I closed my eyes. Part of me had hoped, stupidly, naively, that this was desperation, that she'd panicked that somewhere in there was still my mother. But this was premeditated, calculated. She'd planned every step. There's more, Marcus continued. They found communications with a man in Monaco. Emails going back 6 months. He's some kind of investment manager. Your mother was planning to move the money offshore, invest it under false names, and live in Europe permanently. She had a whole new life planned, I said slowly. And you were dead in it. I looked back at the chapel, where people were still milling about, processing what they'd witnessed. She really would have done it, I said. If I hadn't found out, if I'd stayed in Singapore a few more weeks, she would have taken everything and disappeared. I would have come home to find my mother dead from grief, or just gone. But you did find out, Marcus said firmly, and she's going to prison. The arraignment was the following Tuesday. I sat in the courtroom with Rachel, watching my mother in an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back without the careful styling, her face bare of makeup. She looked small, diminished, nothing like the woman who'd stood at that pulpit and lied to 200 people. The prosecutor laid out the charges. Identity fraud, fabricating a death certificate. Wire fraud, the GoFundMe campaign. Trust fraud, attempting to illegally access my inheritance. Filing false documents with the state, conspiracy to commit fraud. Each charge carried years. Combined, they were looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Her public defender tried to argue for bail. My client has no prior record, deep ties to the community. Your client, the prosecutor interrupted, had a one-way ticket to Monaco and a fake passport. She's an extreme flight risk. The judge agreed. Bail denied. As they let her out, my mother's eyes found mine. For a moment, I waited for something, an apology, an explanation, something human. Instead, she mouthed, "This is your fault." I felt Rachel's hand on my arm, steadying me. After the hearing, the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Walsh, approached us. "Miss Castellanos, I want you to know we're taking this very seriously. Financial abuse within families is often overlooked or minimized. Your case is going to send a message." "What kind of sentence are we looking at?" I asked. "If she takes a plea deal, probably 8 to 10 years. If she goes to trial and loses, 15 to 20. Given the evidence, I don't think she'll risk trial." "Good." Walsh studied my face. "You're handling this remarkably well." I gave a hollow laugh. "Am I? I'm not sure. I think I'm still in shock. My mother tried to kill me legally. I'm not sure there's a handbook for processing that." "There's not," Walsh said gently. "But there are resources, victim services, counseling. I'll have my office send you information." As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed. The story had gone national. "Woman crashes own funeral after mother fakes her death" was everywhere. Rachel had prepared a statement. Miss Castellanos is grateful to law enforcement for their swift action. She asks for privacy as her family processes this betrayal. She will not be making further public comments at this time. But I stopped at the microphone anyway. "Actually, I do want to say something." Rachel gave me a warning look, but I continued. "Financial abuse happens more often than people think. It happens in families. It happens to people who trust the wrong person with power of attorney, with joint accounts, with estate management. If you're in a situation where someone is controlling your money, isolating you, or pressuring you to sign documents you don't understand, get help. Talk to a lawyer. Talk to the police. Don't wait until it's too late." I paused, then added, "And to anyone who thinks they can fake someone's death for money, just know that the dead have a really annoying habit of showing up to their own funerals." That soundbite made every news outlet for a week. The extended family split immediately. Half of them, my uncles, several cousins, my father's side, reached out with support, horror, and apologies for not seeing the signs. The other half? They blamed me. My aunt, my mother's other sister, called me 3 days after the arrest. "You didn't have to humiliate her publicly like that. You could have handled this privately. Now she's going to prison and the family name is destroyed." I listened to her lecture for 5 minutes before interrupting. "Aunt Linda, she faked my death. She threw me a funeral. She stood in a church and lied to everyone who loved her. What part of that should I have handled privately?" "She's still your mother?" "She stopped being my mother the moment she decided I was worth more dead than alive. And if you can't see how profoundly wrong that is, then we don't have anything else to discuss." I hung up. She didn't call back, but others did. Cousins I barely knew wanted to stay neutral and suggested I forgive and move on. Family friends who'd attended the funeral suddenly had opinions about how I'd set a trap and publicly shamed a grieving woman. The mental gymnastics were Olympic level. Rachel, ever practical, suggested I change my number. "You don't owe these people anything. They're trying to make you the villain because it's easier than admitting they were fooled." She was right. I changed my number, blocked half my family on social media, drew boundaries like I was building a fortress. My uncle checked in weekly. I talked to Patricia's lawyer. She's still refusing to take responsibility. She's claiming you pushed her to desperation by being unsupportive. "Of course she is," I said tiredly. "Narcissists never accept blame. I'm sorry, Alina. I knew she was difficult, but I never thought—" "None of us did. That's what makes this so effective. She knew exactly how far she could push before people would question her." 3 months after the arrest, my mother's lawyer reached out with a plea deal offer, 10 years in exchange for pleading guilty to all charges and agreeing to never contact me again. Part of the deal included her signing over any claim to my father's estate, relinquishing all trustee responsibilities, and accepting a permanent restraining order. I accepted immediately. "Don't you want to make a victim impact statement?" Walsh asked. "You could tell the judge how this affected you." I thought about it. Thought about standing in a courtroom and explaining how it felt to read your own obituary, to see your mother cry crocodile tears at your funeral, to realize the woman who gave birth to you saw you as nothing more than a transaction. "No," I said finally. I don't want to give her any more of my words. She's had enough. The sentencing was quick. 10 years. My mother didn't look at me, didn't apologize, just stared straight ahead as the judge read the sentence, her face blank. As they led her out, I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not grief. Just a profound, echoing emptiness where a mother's love should have been. I took a leave of absence from work. Singapore felt too far, too disconnected from everything that had happened. I needed to be present, to process, to rebuild. I stayed with Rachel for a month, then rented a small apartment in Brooklyn, far enough from Greenwich to breathe, close enough to handle the legal aftermath. The Richard Castellanos Memorial Foundation took shape slowly. I hired a director, established a board, set up the grant application process. We launched 6 months after the funeral with a gala that raised an additional $200,000. At the gala, I gave a speech about my father, about trust, about how the things we build should outlast the people who try to tear them down. I didn't mention my mother once. She didn't deserve to be part of his legacy. The foundation's first grant went to a family in Hartford whose grandfather had been scammed out of his retirement by a fraudulent financial advisor. We paid for their legal fees and helped them recover 70% of the stolen money. The second went to a young architect from the Bronx who couldn't afford graduate school. We covered her tuition for 2 years. Every grant felt like a small act of defiance against what my mother had tried to do. I also started therapy. Dr. Reeves specialized in family trauma and financial abuse. Our first session, she asked me what I wanted to work on. I don't know how to trust anymore, I said. My mother faked my death for money. How do I trust anyone after that? You start small, she said. You trust the people who showed up, the lawyer who helped you, the investigator who believed you, the uncle who stood in the aisle and stopped your mother from running. You build from there. It took time. Months of sessions, of unpacking childhood memories and realizing how many red flags I'd ignored, how many small cruelties I'd normalized. But slowly, I started to rebuild. I reconnected with old friends who'd been pushed out by my mother's drama. I started dating again, cautiously, with background checks courtesy of Marcus, half joking, half serious. I began to separate mother, the concept, from Patricia, the person who'd betrayed me. 1 year after the funeral, I visited my father's grave. It was the first time I'd been back to the cemetery since his actual death. I sat on the grass and told him everything. The trust fund, the funeral, the foundation, all of it. I hope I made you proud, I said quietly. I hope the foundation is what you would have wanted. I hope. My voice broke. I hope you know I tried to love her. I really tried. The wind rustled through the trees. No answers, but I didn't need any. I knew my father would have been horrified by what Patricia did, but I also knew he would have been proud of how I handled it. I left flowers on his grave, not on hers. She had her own plot, purchased with fraud money, where she'd never be buried because she'd be in prison for the next decade. Some ironies are too perfect to be accidental. 2 years after her sentencing, I received a letter from prison. My first instinct was to throw it away. My therapist suggested I read it first, then decide. I opened it carefully, like it might explode. Dear Elena, I've had a lot of time to think. 2 years in here gives you that. I want you to know I never meant for things to go that far. It started small. Just checking the trust documents, seeing what options existed. Then the money got tighter and the options started looking more like solutions. I know you think I'm a monster. Maybe I am. But I want you to understand that after your father died, I was alone. You had your career, your travel, your life. I had an empty house and memories. The money felt like the only thing I had left of him. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I'm just asking you to understand that I was desperate. And desperation makes you do things you never thought possible. I hope you're happy. I hope the foundation is doing well. I hope you've built a life that's everything you wanted. Mom, I read it 3 times. Then I wrote back. Not because she deserved a response, but because I needed to say it. Patricia, I received your letter. I want you to understand something very clearly. Desperation doesn't make you fake your daughter's death. Desperation doesn't make you throw a funeral and accept condolences for someone you know is alive. Desperation doesn't make you plan to flee the country with stolen money. Those were choices. Calculated, deliberate, choices. You weren't alone because I had a career. You were alone because you pushed everyone away with your manipulation and control. You weren't desperate for money. You were desperate for something you could control. And when you couldn't control me, you decided to erase me. I don't hate you. Hate requires energy I won't waste. But I will never forgive you, and I will never have contact with you again after this letter. You signed your letter, Mom. You lost that title the day you declared me dead. Elena, I sent it. I never heard from her again. 3 years after the funeral, I was invited to speak at a national conference on family financial abuse. The organizers had read about my case and wanted me to share my story. I almost said no. The idea of standing in front of hundreds of people and reliving the worst betrayal of my life felt impossible. But then I thought about all the people the foundation had helped, the families who'd reached out with their own stories of financial abuse, of stolen inheritances, of relatives who'd exploited power of attorney. I said yes. The conference was in Chicago. Rachel came with me for moral support. As we sat in the hotel room the night before my speech, she asked, "Are you nervous?" Terrified, I admitted. What if I break down? What if people think I'm exploiting this for attention? Elena, Rachel said firmly, you're a woman who flew halfway around the world, gathered evidence, coordinated with law enforcement, and walked into your own funeral to expose fraud. You can handle a speech. She was right. The next day, I stood on that stage and told my story. All of it. The phone calls from Singapore, the fake death certificate, the funeral, the moment I walked in and saw my mother's face. The audience was silent. Absolutely silent. When I finished, I added, financial abuse thrives in silence. It thrives when victims are too ashamed to speak up, when families prioritize reputation over justice, when we normalize small acts of control until they become large acts of theft. My mother stole more than money. She tried to steal my identity, my life, my father's legacy, and she almost succeeded because she knew I'd be too far away to stop her, too trusting to question her, too kind to believe she'd go that far. But here's what I learned. Trust isn't weakness, kindness isn't naivety, and speaking up isn't betrayal, it's survival. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. People were crying. Afterward, dozens came up to share their own stories. Adult children whose parents had drained their college funds, elderly people whose caretakers had stolen their life savings, siblings who'd been written out of wills through manipulation. Every story was different. Every story was the same. That night, sitting in the hotel bar with Rachel, I finally felt something shift. I think I'm okay, I said quietly. Rachel raised her glass. You're more than okay. You're extraordinary. We drank to that, to survival, to justice, to building something good from the ashes of betrayal. 5 years after my funeral, I'm standing in my father's study, the one in the Greenwich house that I kept after selling the rest of the estate. The Richard Castellanos Memorial Foundation has helped 347 families and funded 52 scholarships. We've expanded to 3 states and are planning national coverage within 2 years. I'm back working in Singapore part-time, but I've built a life that's balanced. Time for work, time for the foundation, time for the relationships I've rebuilt. I'm engaged to Daniel, a structural engineer I met at a foundation gala. He knows my whole story. On our 3rd date, I told him about the funeral, half expecting him to run. Instead, he said, my mother embezzled from her employer when I was in college. I get it. Family trauma is complicated. We bonded over therapy recommendations and trust issues. It's not romantic in a traditional sense, but it's real. My uncle calls every Sunday. We have dinner once a month. He's the only family from my mother's side I still speak to, and even that took years to rebuild. My mother was released on parole last year after serving 8 years. She moved to Arizona, far from Connecticut, far from me, far from the life she destroyed. I heard through my uncle that she got a job as a bookkeeper at a small firm. The irony is not lost on me. She sent one letter after her release. I didn't open it. Rachel asked if I wanted to know what it said. No, I said. That chapter is closed. Today is my 30th birthday. The age I was supposed to be when I got full access to my trust fund. The age my mother tried to make sure I never reached. I'm celebrating at the foundation's headquarters with the staff, the board, and the families we've helped. There's a cake, champagne, and a photo of my father on the wall. Someone gives a toast to Elena, who turned the worst betrayal into the best legacy. Everyone drinks. I look at my father's photo and raise my glass. Thanks, Dad, I whisper, for the trust fund, for believing in me, and for not being around to see what she became. You deserved better. Later that night, Rachel finds me on the balcony. You okay? She asks. Yeah, I say, and I mean it. I really am. She hands me an envelope. This came to the foundation office today, marked personal. I open it carefully. Inside is a letter from a woman in Oregon. Dear Miss Castellanos, I read about your case 3 years ago. At the time, my mother was my power of attorney, and I was noticing irregularities in my accounts. Your story gave me the courage to investigate. I discovered she'd stolen $200,000 over 5 years. Because of you, I pressed charges. Because of you, I got my money back. Because of you, I learned that family doesn't get a free pass for theft. Your foundation helped me pay my legal fees. I just wanted you to know that you saved more than my finances. You saved my ability to trust myself again. Thank you for being brave enough to walk into that funeral. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up. I read it twice, tears streaming down my face. This is why I'm okay. Not because my mother is in prison, or because I have money, or because I exposed her fraud. I'm okay because I took something toxic and transmuted it into something that helps people. I took a funeral meant to bury me and turned it into a resurrection, not just mine, but for everyone who thought they had to stay silent. I fold the letter carefully and put it in my pocket. Ready to go back in? Rachel asks. Yeah, I say, looking through the window at the party, at the people laughing, at the life I've built from the ruins of betrayal. Let's celebrate. As we walk back inside, I think about the funeral one last time. My mother thought she could bury me. Instead, I buried her lies, her manipulation, her control. And I rose from that grave stronger than she ever imagined possible. Some daughters inherit money. I inherited my father's integrity, his work ethic, and his belief that the right thing is worth fighting for, even when the fight is against your own mother. That inheritance is worth more than $4.2 million. That inheritance saved my life. I turned 30 today, alive, free, and surrounded by people who chose me not because of blood or obligation, but because of who I am. My mother tried to write my ending, but I wrote my own resurrection. And that, it turns out, is the best revenge of all.